This is one of the most embarrassing mistakes you can make. It's easy to do, and hundreds of thousands of drivers do it every year. Duh! The schoolboy error in question is called misfueling, putting the wrong sort of fuel into your car. Whether petrol into diesel or diesel into petrol, more than 1 in 7 of us have done it. Men are twice as likely to commit this humiliating error as women. And I'm told some of the most frequent misfuelers are police officers. Your garage is likely to prescribe a new fuel tank, new fuel lines, a new fuel pump, new injectors, in fact, the whole fuel system at a cost of thousands of pounds. Factor in the environmental problem of disposing of contaminated fuel, and you can see why misfueling costs British motorists millions of pounds a year. Sometimes your insurance will cover the mistake, but often it won't. But is it really necessary to replace everything, or would, say, a quick blast down the road with the right fuel be enough to sort everything out? To find out, I bought a couple of old cars, one diesel and one petrol, and we're going to see how they cope on the wrong fuel. First, I'm going to try putting diesel into a petrol car. Now, in practice, diesel nozzles are slightly wider than petrol ones, and any petrol car with a catalyst should have a narrower fuel filler neck that prevents misfueling. But even though it's a really hard push to get it in, over 20,000 people make this mistake every year. Now, in a petrol engine, the power is produced by the spark plug igniting a compressed mixture of petrol and air. But diesel has a much higher flash point than petrol, meaning it's much harder to ignite. So there's a possibility the engine just won't go at all. The tank in our Escort was nearly empty of unleaded, and I'll be putting in 5 litres of diesel. The sort of amount you might put in on the forecourt before realising your mistake. Right, let's try it. Starts okay. Into drive. Escort automatics. Well, we're going, which is a good thing. At first, the diesel in a petrol car didn't seem to have any unusual effects, but after a few minutes, the car started to judder. I think we'll have to do something. This is not a very well car at all. Well, I've got about a couple of miles in it, and some of the time it runs pretty well. Other times it gets into sort of bouts of hiccuping. So I think it's probably time to siphon off this contaminated fuel, put in some fresh unleaded, and see if we can restore it to health. Which is easier said than done. This car seemed to be fitted with an anti-siphoning device. So we abandoned the idea, left the diesel in it, and filled it up with its usual petrol. Surprisingly, after a few minutes, the car seemed pretty much back to normal. But has its brief encounter with the wrong fuel damaged the catalyst? We did an emissions test to find out. Is that a... Right, it is. It passed. So, putting diesel into your petrol car doesn't seem to be a disaster, at least once you've recovered from your initial loss of face. But what about putting petrol into a diesel? Putting petrol into a diesel is much more common. It's much simpler to do. The slim, unleaded nozzle slips into the broader diesel filler easily. Oops. Now, this car was nearly empty of diesel, and very soon it's going to have 5 litres of petrol in it. Is it going to be instant disaster this time? I wasn't worried about the screaming fan belt. The Astra had been doing that since I'd bought it. And, amazingly, it seems to be running OK. That could be leading me into a false sense of security. You see, petrol, unlike diesel, has no lubricating effect, and it's particularly likely to damage the fuel pump. A more modern diesel would be much more likely to be damaged by now, because the pumps run at much higher pressures and to tighter tolerances. But I've driven up and down for around 15 miles, and the Astra seemed to be running on petrol very happily. Hey! If anything, it feels a bit quicker. After about half an hour playing around, the only signs of anything wrong were sparks falling from a newly developed hole in the exhaust. Apart from that, the car had been running fine. But then, during our emissions test, things took a turn for the worse. Not try it again, was it? You said when you took... See, that's flat. It's going to stop. Ah! That's amazing. We couldn't stop it on the track, but it's actually stopped during its emissions test. Let's try and start it again. Come on, it might go. Ah, oh, sorry. That's not going. That's not going. But we're not going to give up on the Astra yet. We're going to try putting diesel in and see if we can restore it to life. Maybe if I filled the tank with its original fuel, I could flush out the petrol and have it up and running again. The moment of truth. Strange noises. It looked like a victory. But then, the engine died again. Eventually, after a few attempts, I had it working again. The diesel was starting to run through normally. The smoke gradually turned to the right diesel-y colour. Time for a test drive. And it was fine. The very next day, I went shopping in it. The day after that, I took it for a 200-mile drive on the motorway. It certainly proves you don't always need to replace the fuel system at great expense. Though I would suggest you have the fuel tank drained professionally if your car's worth more than mine. And I don't suppose a highly tuned modern diesel would be so robust. But this exercise certainly restores your faith in old bangers.
Oh, I think it's quite high up, don't you think, Biggs?
No, I don't like it.